Index Astartes, sons of Horus, brothers in glory and in grief. Among the 9 legions which stayed faithful to the Emperor, the sons of Horus are hailed across the Imperium as the greatest. Warriors without equal, they still hold to their hearts the ideals of the Great Crusade, forever fighting to expand the Imperium's borders. There are few warriors as revered and as feared as them in the galaxy, and the legacy of the first War Master still echoes today on a million worlds. Yet the shadows of their fallen Primarch looms over all scions of the 16th, driving them to bouts of melancholy, and unbridled fury. Horus's fall during the siege haunts the memory of Lupercal's sons, forming a tale illustrating both the Legion's greatest strength and its greatest weakness: passion. Grudges 10,000 years old are still waiting to be paid, and the sons of Horus are still waging their millennial-long feud against their own twisted reflection, born of the primogenitor's madness in the dark days of the Clone Wars. But on the field of battle, there are few others the Imperial forces battling the darkness among the stars would want on their side more than the 16th Legion. Origins. For 10,000 years, Imperial historians and philosophers alike have wondered, what would have happened if the Dark Gods had not stolen the Primarchs from the Emperor, scattering them across the galaxy while they were still infants? How different would the galaxy be had the 20 sons of the Master of Mankind been raised as he intended? We will never know the answer to that question, and to ponder it too deeply is to court madness and delusion. The mind shattered by grief at all that was lost. But a glimpse of the glories that would have been can still be seen by looking at one Primarch who was raised by the Emperor, Horus Lupercal, greatest of the Emperor's sons, first War Master of the Imperium, and Primarch of the 16th Legion. Unlike some other Primarchs, the life of Horus is well remembered in the Imperium, most notably thanks to the extensive account he himself gave to the famous remembrancer Petronella Vivar during the Great Crusade. Like all Primarchs, Horus was taken from the Emperor when he was still an infant, and his lifepod crashed on the dying mining world of Catonia, a few light years away from Terra. Once Catonia had been a planet rich in minerals and other precious resources. But decades of ruthless exploitation had left it all but barren, and its population suffered from poverty, starvation, and pollution. Entire hive cities had descended into anarchy, as dozens of gangs fought each other over the scraps that remained. The rich and powerful elite had long departed the world, abandoning Catonia in a state of complete lawlessness. The planet itself was on the verge of collapse, its structural integrity damaged by the careless mining. The only societal structure left on the planet was the gangs, who fought in the tunnels and on the surface alike. Ruled by the strongest, these gangs varied in size, from a handful of raiders to 10,000s of humans, toughened by a lifetime of conflict, holding power comparable to that of the techno-barbarians of Terra themselves. Every single one of these primitive cultures was brutal and unforgiving, but as in all things, there were degrees in Catonia's savagery. Some gangs held a group above the individual, while others were little more than packs of jackals, ready to betray one another at the first opportunity. In that environment, Horus, though barely a child by human standards, survived and even thrived. For 3 years, the young Primarch learned the brutal ways of the Catonian people, living in the shadows. Already, a sense of justice began to manifest in him, and several gangs started to exchange whispered rumors of a child that could defeat 10 men twice his size alone, who attacked those who preyed upon weaker humans. But before Horus could even reach adolescence, the Emperor arrived to Catonia, sensing the presence of one of his children on the desolate planet. The gangs of Catonia reacted violently to the sudden arrival of so many strangers, after so long spent in total isolation. From the moment the Emperor and his custodians set foot on the planet, they were beset by ambushes and attacks as gang leaders roused their followers to war against the intruders. Of course, none of them were any threat to the Emperor, and thousands were slain before Horus was found. The young Primarch, upon hearing of the stranger's arrival, felt in his heart that he was the reason for it, and came forward to face whoever had traveled so far to find him. Horus met his father and his guards amongst the bleeding remnants of the latest ambush, standing tall and proud in front of the golden giants. What transpired between them during that first meeting is unknown, but Horus left Catonia soon after aboard the Emperor's personal flagship, Bucephalus. It was like looking at the sun for the first time and realizing everything he had missed away from its light. In later years, when asked how to describe his first meeting with the Emperor, Horus would use these words, though he knew they failed to truly carry what he had felt that day. The man radiated a kind of light that warmed up the soul, an aura that carried with it the promise of a better future. He smiled when he saw the boy, and Horus felt his heart tighten at the sight. How lonely had that man been, that merely seeing him would make him smile like that. "Hello, Horus?" he said. "No, you're wrong. Hello, Horus," he said, and the golden light was gone, revealing an old man who was so very tired. "I am glad to finally meet you. I am your father." Not just the young Primarch left Catonia that day, however. Many among the Emperor's retinue called for the planet's destruction, to punish its inhabitants for the crime of daring to assault the master of mankind. The Emperor, however, respected the courage of the gangers, misplaced as it might have been, and instead ordered that the planet become a recruiting ground for the Imperium. The Great Crusade had barely begun, and it would need a great many soldiers as determined and though as tough, as the people of Catonia. Tens of thousands of gangers vanished alongside Horus, most of them to be transformed under the Gene Surgeon's attention to be reborn as warriors of the newly formed 16th Space Marine Legion. Others were trained and formed to several contingents of elite troopers, who would go on to become some of the most famous of the Imperial Army's regiments. Having found one of his sons far closer to Terra than he had anticipated, the Emperor began to educate him immediately. The best tutors of the Imperium were called upon, teaching Horus all that they knew, while the Emperor himself shared his knowledge of the galaxy with his son. However, the Master of Mankind refrained from sharing some secrets with Horus. He didn't tell the young Primarch of the threat of chaos, of the ruinous powers, and the demons that served him. Whether he came to regret it centuries later, we cannot know. He did share his vision of the galaxy, though, an Imperium strong and free from the threats of the Xenos, no longer blinded by superstition, nor foolishly devoted to technology. Many sacrifices had already been made in the name of that vision, and many more would be required before it became a reality. But the Emperor promised his son that one day, with his help, they would make it so. Horus learned everything he was taught, and a lot more besides. He frequently left his quarters aboard the Bucephalus to explore the rest of the ship, watching the first lords of the Great Crusade gather and plan the conquest of the galaxy. On several such occasions, these warlords were surprised to see the youth emerge from the shadows and point out a flaw in their plans before vanishing once more. The quickly growing child also witnessed the negotiations and politics between various factions of the Imperium, including the consequences their feuds could have for those under their command. It is believed that it was during this period that the Primarch developed the distaste of petty politicians and courtiers that, though well hidden, would always accompany his dealings with the Administratum and all leaders who put their own position and power above the needs of those under their authority. Intense physical training was also part of Horus's education. Though like all Primarchs, he had an instinctual understanding of such things that put most of his would-be instructors to shame. He was trained in battle arts, both developed amidst the warring chaos of the Age of Strife, and inherited from master to apprentice for 10,000 of years. He was made to perform feats of endurance that would have killed the Space Marine, and fought combat servitors that the techno-priest of the Mechanicum had, at his own demand, designed to kill him. But no matter how hard the challenge, Horus triumphed. Those who were involved in his education began to develop an almost religious respect for the young Primarch. And as rumors of his prowess spread, efforts to locate his brothers intensified. While Horus was being groomed as the leader of the Great Crusade, the Sistine Legion was being prepared. Children from Catonia formed the bulk of the aspirants, and its numbers swelled until, just as Horus emerged from adolescence and into his full power as a Primarch, it was ready for full deployment. The first Primarch, as Horus Rupercal was already known to those who were aware of his existence, was brought by the Emperor to those who bore his gene seed. It was time for him to take command of the Legion that was forged in his image, and lead it to glory and conquest in the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade. Primer inter pares. First among equals. The primer inter pares is my doing. When the Emperor had lost Horus and his brothers to the machinations of the warp, he had used the research and samples still in his possession to create the first Astartes. For this, he needed male children strong and genetically pure enough to bear the trials of the process, and he looked for them across the surface of unified Terra. Those who bore the genetic imprint of the 16th infant were from hunter clans, regardless of whether their tribes had survived in jungles or in slums. All of them, without exception, were humble of birth, tested since their childhood by a harsh environment. This made them pragmatic and devoted to the group rather than the individual, though they still had dreams of their own. The first deployment of the 16th Legion occurred long before Horus was discovered. When the Emperor had completed the unification of Terra and turned his eyes to the rest of the Sol system, the clans of Luna, Terra's single moon, had great knowledge of genetic lore, and the Master of Mankind desired that expertise and facilities to help in the expansion of his legions. However, the clans, who called themselves the Selenar, had maintained their independence from Terra techno-barbarians and Magos alike for centuries. Though they welcomed his ambassadors, they refused the Emperor's offer to become part of the Imperium, secretly laughing at the Imperial truth. In response, the Master of Mankind decided to send 3 of his legions, the 7th, the 13th, and the 16th, to bring them to compliance by military means. The Imperial Fist, the Ultramarines, and the Sons of Horus. Pretty good pick. The Selenar Gene Cults. No one knows how old the cults of Luna truly were when the Emperor first revealed himself on warring Terra. They had occupied the moon for as long as anyone living remembered, and since mankind has had the capabilities of traveling to Luna as soon as the end of the second millennium, there's a very large gap in history as to when lunar colonization began and when the cults appeared. What is known is that the gene cults were fanatic followers of a strange and unholy religion. They used their technological knowledge to pursue immortality through genetic reincarnation, somehow managing to preserve the experiences from one incarnation to the next. This echoed with their cult's belief that every human being is merely a reflection of some overreaching archetype. Each of the cults focused on different archetype, some inspired by legends and myths, others so alien that rumors grew that the Selenar had been influenced by Xenos contacts prior to the Age of Strife. After the first pacification of Luna, the Selenar bowed to the authority of the Imperium and assisted in the extension of the Space Marine legions. Over the 2 centuries of the Great Crusade, hundreds of thousands of legionnaires were transformed into their genetic facilities. until the legions each developed their own structures for processing these recruits. This led to the cults slowly losing their use to the Imperium, and while the Emperor and later the High Lords of Terra have kept to the agreement that was reached after the first pacification, their numbers diminished over the years. Eventually, the gene cults died out, and their doomed cities left alone on the Terran moon. Many tech priests have attempted to breach them and claim the secrets that remain hidden there, but few have returned alive. The last of the Selenar left safeguards to preserve the legacy of their kin from plunderers. There are rumors that not all Selenars accepted their submission to the Imperium. According to the tales that are only accessible to the most highly ranked Inquisitors, it was a group of such disgruntled gene rights who sabotaged the gene seed of the Third Legion soon after its inception, leading to the catastrophic losses the Emperor's children suffered before their Primarch was found. According to these hidden texts, the reason the war waged by the 16th Legion on Luna is known as the First Pacification. According to these hidden texts, the reason the war waged by the 16th Legion on Luna is known as the First Pacification is because following this act of treachery, the Emperor sent the Third Legion to wage a second war against the rebels, one that was erased from almost every record to preserve the Selenar cults who had remained faithful to their oaths. As soon as they realized that the time of diplomacy had passed, the gene cults prepared for war. Their usual divisions were quickly cast aside, in the face of the possibility of losing their independence, and when the legions arrived to Luna, they found their foes ready. The 16th Legion had been chosen to be the vanguard of the assault, and they struck with all the fury that would become legendaries in the centuries to come. The anti-orbital weapons of the cults, marked by spies hidden amongst the diplomatic envoys, were destroyed by squads of Astartes, and the warriors then spread in the subterranean tunnels of the cults, butchering all those who they came across. The cults fought back with their gene rights genetically altered beings designed for conflict, but they were no match for those who had received the Emperor's own alterations. Soon, the two other legions began the advance and seized the genetic facilities, finding their defenders terrified and broken. After a few hours, the leaders of the gene cults called out to the Emperor, begging him to stop the killers he had let loose in their midst. The words, "Call back your wolves," became part of the 16th Legion's folklore, and soon, after the first pacification of Luna, the Emperor himself bestowed these warriors with the name Luna Wolves, in acknowledgement of the great service they had done the Imperium that day. With the genetic facilities secured and the compliance of the gene cults enforced, the legions could now grow to match the needs of the Imperium. The first Catonian recruits became Luna Wolves on the very moon that gave the legion its name, and when they were ready, the Emperor brought Horus to them so that he might take command. Under the leadership of their Primarch, the Luna Wolves left the Sol system to take their rightful place at the Great Crusade's forefront. More worlds were conquered by them than by any other legion, though their way of making war often left the worlds in their wake crippled. The Luna Wolves kept following the same tactics they had used on Luna, and before that, in the gang wars of Catonia, they went directly for the enemy leader, not hesitating to use excessive force to end conflict as quickly as possible. While the infrastructure of the worlds they brought to compliance was often more or less spared from the destruction, the hierarchy was always beheaded, leaving the Imperial Adepts sent after them with a much harder task of integrating the planet into the Imperium. The Lupercal Tank. It was during the Great Crusade that the quest for knowledge of the Adeptus Mechanicus began. This sacred undertaking, still unfinished after 10,000 years, has the goal of gathering all the lost STC schematics used by mankind during the Dark Age of technology. These templates are more valuable than entire worlds, and the Mechanicus has been known to start wars as a mere rumor of their presence. As the Imperium expanded, many of the worlds brought to compliance were found to have STC left on them from before the Age of Strife. The Mechanicus greedily reclaimed them as part of the pact that was forged between the tech priests of Mars and the Emperor. While some of these templates were part of forbidden branches of technology, and others were buried within temples never to see the light of day, many were incorporated into the new Imperium to serve in the effort of the Great Crusade. One such design was the Lupercal tank, so named after the aggression displayed by the 16th Legion. Used to this day by almost every regiment of the Imperial Guard, bar those from worlds too technologically regressed to be able to use it, the Lupercal tank is incredibly versatile. It can be adapted for almost any kind of battleground, from streets of Hive City to the dunes of chemical wastelands. Weapons can also be replaced easily. Learning to drive it is ridiculously easy, and it can run on anything even remotely fuel-like. Forge Worlds chum out billions of these war machines every year, and they are used across the galaxy to fight the many enemies of the Imperium. Not all human worlds found by the expeditionary fleets, led by the Luna Wolves, were conquered, of course. On many worlds, the words of the iterators were able to convince the population to embrace the imperial truth and join the growing Imperium not in violence, but in celebration. In the case of the expeditionary fleets that Horus himself led, it was very rare for the human worlds to refuse integration into the Imperium indeed. The charisma of the first Primarch was almost impossible to resist, even for legionaries. Many planetary leaders, intent on politely refusing the offer to join the Imperium, left the meeting wondering why they had ever wanted to do such a thing in the first place, convinced of the righteousness of the Imperium. As the Great Crusade went on, the lost Primarchs were discovered, one after the other. Horus made sure to meet each of them when he wasn't present at their discovery, and through his charisma formed strong bonds with all of them. Even bitter Korax and prideful Vulcan couldn't help but like their elder brother, and it is said that all of them, in private at least, acknowledged that he was the greatest among them. Still, there were those brothers with whom Horus had an especially close relationship. Among those was Fulgrim, for Lupercal and the Phoenician forged their bonds of brotherhood in the fire of battle and conquest. When Fulgrim was found on the world of Chemos and given command of his own legion, his sons were too few for him to operate alone. The Third Legion, named the Emperor's Children, in acknowledgement of their Primarch's devotion, fought at the side of Horus in the Great Crusade, with Lupercal and the Phoenician forging a bond of brotherhood that transcended their blood ties. After 50 years of conquest, the numbers of the Third Legion had reached the level where they could operate on their own, and the two Primarchs parted ways after them, and their sons had renewed their oaths of brotherhood and sworn to come to each other's aid if the need ever arose. Soon after that parting, the Luna Wolves arrived on the world of Davin. With them came a contingent of word-bearers, whose Primarch, Lorgar, had recently been found on the arid world of Colchis. Leading the warriors of the 17th Legion was Erebus, one of the first chaplains to have risen from the Primarch's homeworld. Davin was a world populated by primitive tribes, many of which had evolved over the centuries of isolation into something that wasn't quite human. Despite this, and their primitive level of technology, they fought against the legionaries with great courage, impressing even Lupercal with their bravery. Horus was convinced that the tribes could be made to see reason and join the Imperium peacefully. Some clans even surrendered and helped the Imperium fight their fellow Davinites soon after the beginning of the campaign. However, Erebus came to the Primarch, telling him that he watched the rites and beliefs of the Davinites, and that they reminded him of the calls that had held his homeworld's people captives for centuries before the coming of Lorgar. There is a sickness hiding beneath the surface of this world, my lord. You must purge it with fire, rather than allow it to endure, or try to treat it with words. Erebus's words to Horus Lupercal on the Davinite tribes. I might like this version of Erebus. Erebus. Erebus convinced Horus that the planet had been cleansed of these religious beliefs, and that none of its corruption could be allowed to spread. He told the Primarch of the human sacrifices performed by the Davonite tribes allied to the Imperium, where the legions couldn't see them. He warned that these tribes were only pretending to join the Imperium, sacrificing their own in order to protect their twisted lifestyles. With heavy heart, Horus accepted the evidence presented by the word-bearer, and the tribes of Davin were broken upon the anvil of war. The survivors were gathered in great camps, while every trace of their belief system was rudely expunged by the word-bearers. It is said that the Luna Wolves, when they saw the fever with which their cousins were destroying an entire culture, felt something akin to fear for the first time since their ascension. Several decades after the departure of the two legions, the Magos biologists detached to the imperial settlement on Davin declared that the entire population of the tribes was genetically corrupt. They were too deviant from the purity of the human genome to be even attributed the status of an abhuman that had been bestowed upon other mutated strains. The entire population was eliminated, and new colonists were brought to Davin. The world has, to this day, retained a dark reputation. Several decades later, at the turn of the millennium, the Great Crusade peaked with the Ullanor Crusade. After years of fighting back the war of the Orc Empire led by Uruk, Perturabo had called for his brother's aid in defeating the Xenos war boss. His call was answered not just by Horus, but also by Jagatai Khan and even the Master of Mankind himself, accompanied by his custodies. With the strength of 3 legions and the Emperor's own guardians, the Imperium crushed the bestial empire of Urlak. The Iron Warriors grounded the Orcs to paste, while the White Wolves sowed confusion and discord among their lines with lightning strikes. Horus and the Emperor, for their part, struck together at the very heart of the Green Hordes. Back to back, the Master of Mankind, the first Primarch, descended upon Urg's fortress and slew the Orc war boss. This glorious moment is immortalized on one of the walls of Lupercal's Cathedral on Terra, where the 2 greatest heroes of mankind are depicted striking as one against the Xenos beasts. It is said that any who look upon this wondrous image cannot help but weep, both at the magnificence on display and in sorrow that it will never be again. After the death of Urlak Urg, the Orc Empire of Ullanor was broken, and the planet purged of greenskins entirely. This marked the destruction of the last great Xenos dominion, capable of presenting a threat to the Imperium as a whole. There remained many alien empires to break, many human worlds to bring into the fold, but the last known threat, capable of presenting a threat to the Imperium as a whole, was gone. But the last known threat to the Emperor's vision had been beaten. The victory at Ullanor heralded a new age for mankind, and the Emperor ordered that a great triumph be held in celebration. Mountains were raised, oceans drained, and avenues the size of continents were traced on the perfectly flat surface that was left behind them. Upon those defiled billions of Imperial soldiers, hundreds of thousands of legionnaires, and titans of legios from forge worlds across the entire galaxy. Though we do not know whether or not their brotherhood was complete, it is known to us that most of the Primarchs were there as well. They watched the triumph, which had become more of a celebration of the entire Great Crusade than merely of the victory at Ullanor. Then, at the surprise of those present, the Emperor announced his intent to withdraw from the front of the crusade and return to Terra, where a great work awaited him. Despite the protests of Angron and others, the Master of Mankind was inflexible. He named Horus the War Master of the Imperium, Supreme Commander of the Great Crusade. To Lupercal now would fall the task of coordinating the greatest endeavor in the history of humanity. Humbled and shocked, Horus accepted the honor his father had bestowed upon him, vowing that he would not fail his expectations. To mark this change from one Primarch among others to the leader of the entire Imperium's military might, The 16th Legion was renamed from the Luna Wolves into the Sons of Horus. The Emperor also declared that Magnus would return with him to Terra, alongside the greatest scholars of his legion, save for Ahriman, the first captain, who would lead the rest of the 15th Legion and join with Horus to assist him in his new duties. I cannot tell you my plans, Horus. Not yet. Until I and Magnus know for sure what I intend is truly possible, I refuse to burden you with hope that may prove false. If I fail, if I cannot complete my grand vision, then it would fall to you and your brothers to guide mankind, my son. You must find your own path, your own dream, your own ideal, so that if mine cannot become true, you will have the strength to make yours a reality. It was soon after the triumph that Guilliman, bitter at not having been chosen, asked Horus the permission to take his own expeditionary fleet, the 12th, and go out beyond the borders of known space. Horus, seeing the wound on his brother's pride, allowed it, believing that Roboutian's temper would cool during his journey. Ultimately, this would prove a terrible mistake. But at the time, Horus genuinely believed that Guilliman's anger would pass, and he probably would have, had the dark gods not conspired to twist the heart of the avenging son. As War Master, Horus continued to uphold diplomacy as the first approach to any human culture, stating that there are enough Xenos in the galaxy that want to destroy mankind without us killing each other. Under the influence of his brother Kurz, he also tried to soften the general approach of the Imperium to human worlds, seeking to make sure that violence was always employed only as a last resort. He had various degrees of success. Even the reach of a War Master wasn't large enough to touch every corner of the galaxy at once, but never ceased in his effort, supported by those of his brothers who believed in his vision. However, Horus also showed a great distrust for the Council of Terra his father had appointed to direct the Imperium in his absence. To Horus, the civilians who sat there were unworthy of their rank, and had only obtained them through political maneuvering, and because the organizations they represented were needed by the Imperium. Malcador the Sigillite was the only member he respected, and even then he believed that the old man had been exposed to politics too long. In Horus's eyes, the greed and ambition of the other High Lords endangered the entire Great Crusade, and by extension the Imperium, notably by enforcing taxation upon recently conquered worlds before they were fully integrated into the Empire. 10,000 years later, this attitude is still displayed by his sons. In fact, considering the nature of the Administratum, it is actually much worse. After several years spent keeping the various elements of the Great Crusade together, while also struggling to continue his own military campaign, and with more and more friction appearing between his brothers, Horus was drawn to the world of murder by a distress call from a Blood Angel's force. With him came the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, and that world would be the first step on a journey that would take Horus beyond the limits of everything had believed possible, and into a realm of dark truths and terrible knowledge. The Inter-X. Unwelcome revelation. This world is murder. Last transmission from Captain Kitas Frome of the Blood Angels, leader of the 114th Expeditionary Fleet. The sons of Horus and the 1,000 sons weren't the only ones to have heard the call for aid of the Blood Angels. Before them, a force of Emperor's children led by Lord Commander Eidolon had arrived, determined to rescue their cousins from the planet. Eidolon ordered his forces to make planetfall immediately, despite the risk. Some say it was because he didn't want to waste time in rescuing the Blood Angels. Others, less charitable, claimed that he refused to share the glory with the sons of Horus, whose arrival had been announced by Astropactic Choir. However, the Emperor's children were decimated by the very same foe that had slaughtered the Blood Angels in their entirety. Murder was home to a vicious species of hive insects that the Imperial forces soon came to call the Megarachnid. These insect-like creatures were armed with arm blades capable of tearing through the power armor as if it were paper, while the storms raging permanently over the planet had scattered the Emperor's children, and the dense forest forced the isolated groups to remain on edge permanently. When the reinforcements arrived, Aeron had already died, leaving Captain Saul Tarvitz in command of what little forces he had managed to gather. Only a desperate action of Saul, taking down one of the Megarachnid's great trees upon which they had hung the bodies of the Blood Angels and Emperor's children, resulted in an opening in the storm clouds and allowed the sons of Horus to reinforce their allies. What followed was a brief but bloody campaign, as the forces under Horus's command extracted the surviving Emperor's children and prepared for the extermination of the Megarachnids. Soon after, Tarvitz and his remaining brothers had left the system to return the body of their Lord Commander to Fulgrim. A fleet arrived to murder, or as they called it, Ursiarak. The Mournival at the time of the Interrex incident, Ezekiel Abaddon, captain of the First Company, leader of the Justarian, Tarik Torgadon, captain of the Second Company, Horux Aximand, captain of the Fifth Company, known as Little Horus, Gavriel Loken, captain of the 10th Company. These newcomers were envoys of human civilization that the Imperium hadn't met until now. Calling themselves the Interrex, these humans had survived to the Age of Strife while maintaining a high technological level. However, they had also allied with various Xenos species, including the all but extinct Kind branch, a race that had nearly destroyed itself in past ages, and now existed under the protection of the Interrex. Unlike the Imperium, the Interrex did not believe that all alien species needed to be wiped out. Their first mistake. Indeed, they had defeated the Megarachnids in war, but instead of exterminating them, they had brought the survivors to Ursiarak, where they could live in peace and not be a threat to anyone else. Meeting a civilization with beliefs so contrary to the Imperial truth was a shock to the sons of Horus, but less so for the Thousand Sons, who knew much more of mankind's secret history. Many in the Legion called for war against the Interrex, for had the Emperor not declared that mankind could not coexist with Xenos breeds, but Horus, advised by his Skalmer sons and Ahriman, refused to listen to them, remembering the words his father had left him before returning to Terra. The War Master wanted to bring the Interrex in the Imperium, but he also believed that the Imperium could learn from that civilization. After all, mankind was no longer threatened with extinction at Xenos' hands. With the victory at Ulanor, the last great alien empire had been destroyed. Humanity now was stronger than ever. Perhaps there was no need to wipe out any more other species. Horus and the Interrex envoys agreed to a diplomatic summit on the Interrex homeworld, while the fleet of the 16th Legion awaited at the system's edge. Despite the implicit threat caused by the presence of such awesome force, negotiations progressed relatively well, though the Interrex diplomats were wary of the Imperium's overall military attitude. It soon became evident that direct integration would be difficult, but Horus believed that the two galactic powers could at least be allies, and eventually, over the course of generation, peacefully become one. But that hope was not to be. The killer looked at the blade, turning it so that it reflected the light. It was beautiful in a way no other weapon he had ever wielded, and he had wielded a great many, could ever hope to be. He fancied that he could hear the weapon whisper at the back of his mind, telling him his desires to be used once more rather than left to gather dust. Soon, he promised it. Soon. He departed in the shadows, leaving behind him the corpse of the museum guardians. These fools had had no chance to stop him at all. In truth, he could have taken what he needed without killing them. But their deaths would ensure that the war would erupt between the sons of Horus and the Interrex. One way or another, they would serve the cause of chaos. Such was the will of his lord, Lionel Johnson. Eventually, several days of continued negotiations were brought to an end by the need of the Interrex representatives to rest and discuss with one another. As Horus returned to his quarters, he was attacked by an assassin and struck by a crying branch blade that, despite all of his resilience, brought him down unconscious. Soon after, just as the apothecaries began to work to rouse their Primarch, the Interrex representatives arrived, Insys claiming that one of their museums had been breached and one of the weapons stored there stolen, accusing the Imperium of theft. For a brief and dreadful moment, it seemed that war would erupt, as First Captain Abaddon was enraged at what he perceived as a blatant attempt to get away with the murder of his father, but the rest of the Mournival restrained his rage. When the Astartes told the Interrex representatives of the assassination attempt, they immediately realized their mistake, and after apologizing, they declared that this must be some attempt by the agents of Chaos to sow discord and hatred between the Interrex and the Imperium. At first, the Sons of Horus believed that Chaos was the enemy of the Interrex, and returned to praying for their Primarch's survival. However, a discussion between Gavrion Loken and the newest member of the Mournival and one of the Interrex soldiers revealed there was much more. Having already been exposed to the malevolence of the warp in the previous campaign, Loken believed what most Imperials would have dismissed as superstition, and brought Ahriman to discussion. As soon as the first captain of the Thousand Suns descended from orbit, he sensed the warp corruption clinging on Horus. The wound caused by the Kine Branch blade had created an opening in the War Master's mind, allowing for the creatures of the warp to go in. Horus was still fighting against them. But to save him, the Space Marines needed to go there and rescue the Primarch's soul from those who attacked it. Ahriman immediately gathered his most powerful and skilled librarians, and together they sent the minds of the Mournival, the closest and greatest sons of Lupercal, into the psychic battlefield that Horus' soul had become. We know not what they saw there, and only that the battle was fierce, and ended with the victory of the forces of righteousness, as Horus cast off the shackles of chaos, defiantly proclaiming to the very face of the dark gods that he will never be theirs. They were wolves running through a plain, searching for their alpha. Above them, the skies were torn with unnatural storms, and the stench of death and decay was heavy in the air. But they didn't care. All four of them ran, on and on, seeking the one they loved more than any other. A young boy ran with them too, an ally to the pack, though he was not one of them. He was guiding them to this treacherous place, away from the pits and the traps, and towards their goal. Then they found the Alpha. 4 great and terrible beasts were fighting him, each a nightmarish abomination that had no place in a sane universe. Howling together, the packmates hurled themselves at the beast, their fangs and claws tearing at their flesh. At their side, the boy charged as well, holding a spear in his hand that he rammed the side of some avian monstrosity. The beasts roared their pain and hatred, and turned towards the pack. Between them, the great wolf, the Alpha, rose to his feet, bleeding but unbroken, light shining in his golden eyes, his jaw opened and he howled, the sky itself trembling at the sheer power of the declaration. Freed from the clutches of the warp, Horus rose, still weakened by his trial, but burning with a new determination. He had gained terrible knowledge during his time captive, and needed to return to Terra at once, to bring word of the threat of chaos to the Emperor. The demons that had tortured his soul had also whispered of some great and damnable plot soon to reach fruition, that would bring low all that the Great Crusade had built. All of this the Emperor needed to know, and so Horus left the Interrex, vowing to return one day to continue negotiations, and warning them of the threat he had been told of. The fate of the Interrex. After the end of the heresy, the sons of Horus returned to Interrex space, determined to honor their Primarch's promise. But all they had found were destroyed worlds, their populations slain in hideous scenes of carnage, and their riches plundered. A civilization that had endured for thousands of years had been wiped out. But who was responsible for it remains unclear. Most Imperial scholars put the blame on the Dark Angels, or some other traitor forces sent to prevent the Interrex from intervening in the civil war raging into the Imperium. However, one should remember that chaos has many pawns, and it is entirely possible that the forces that the Dark Gods sent to destroy the Interrex didn't belong to the traitor legions, or even mankind. The journey back to Terra was long and difficult, with the warp and turmoil preventing passage through many known routes and forcing the navigators to take risks. Eventually, Horus and his men reached Sol, only to be greeted with terrible news. Guilliman had turned against the Emperor, and with him, Sanguinius, Rogoldorn, and Ferus Manus. The Heresy, Treachery, and the Darkness. When he heard the news of his brother's treachery, Horus' first reaction was to order his legion to prepare for immediate departure, that he might crush Guilliman and his cohorts himself. However, his reason soon caught up to his rage, and he realized the extent of the damage his fleet had taken, the distance separating him from Ishvan, and the likely influence of chaos in the whole affair. Worse was the fact that the war had already arrived in the solar system. Mars, heart of the Mechanicum, was stormed by a civil war between the Arch-Magi, or Maguses, supporting the rebellion and those who had remained loyal. After several hours of reflection and discussion with the Emperor, Magnus, and his Mournival, Horus decided to send an astropathic message to every legion who remained loyal. To Angron and Lorgar, he commanded they go to the 500 worlds, Guilliman's fiefdom, and the Imperium, and make sure that their resources weren't used to support the rebellion. The remaining legions, the Dark Angels, White Scars, Night Lords, Death Guard, Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Alpha Legion, were ordered to go to the Ishvan system at all speed. There they would confront the traitor legions and their allies and bring them to justice. Soon after the message had been sent, warnings came from all over the solar segmentum. As the news of Guilliman's rebellion had spread, entire systems had declared themselves for the turncoat sun and cut off contact with Terra. Horus divided his legion in several fleets and sent them to punish these traitors closer to the throne world, while also combing his efforts with the Custodes and the Officio Assassinorum to locate hidden spies and infiltrators hiding within the incredible complex structure of Terran society. Even as Horus struggled to maintain order across the solar segmentum, more terrible news kept reaching him. First, the Emperor Magnus vanished in the tunnels beneath the Imperial Palace, fighting a war against the demonic legions that poured through the shattered webway. Then, the survivors of Prospero arrived, and with them came the news of the Space Wolves' betrayal. The prospect of the legion sent to Ishvan facing the wolves as well as the 4 known traitor legions was worrying, but such was the turmoil in the warp that sending warnings to the Retribution fleet was all but impossible. A few weeks later, Perturabo returned from Olympia, and it fell to Horus to tell his brother what had transpired in his absence. Enraged, the Lord of Iron nonetheless listened to the War Master, and sent 30,000 of his warriors under the command of his Triarch, Barbar Falk, to free Mars from the rebel Arch-Magi and the armies of the Tech Horrors. Meanwhile, Perturabo would fortify the Imperial Palace, and the unlikely event that the war somehow reached the throne world. The most terrible news, however, was that reports that soon arrived from Ishvan, carried upon the tumultuous tides of the warp ahead of the few survivors of the disaster that had occurred there. 4 of the 7 legions sent at Ishvan, the Dark Angels, the White Scars, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, had revealed themselves as accomplices of Guilliman's treachery, and had all but destroyed the loyalist forces who fought the traitors on Ishvan 5. Conrad Kurz was dead, Alpharius was missing, and most of the Death Guard had perished. At the same time, the Word Bearers and the World Eaters had been cut off from the rest of the Imperium as a massive warp storm erupted within the 500 worlds, trapping them in the hell Guilliman's kingdom had become. The Ultramarines began to advance towards Terra, while their allies scattered across the galaxy in pursuit of their own dark agendas. There were some among Horus's circle of advisors who wanted to take the Legion and meet the Ultramarines head-on, to crush them while they were isolated from the rest of the traitors. But the War Master knew that, for all the strength of his sons, they wouldn't be able to match Guilliman's warp-infused legionnaires in open battle. Not with the Iron Hands fighting at their side. Though it tore at his heart, Horus knew that the only chance the Loyalists had to defeat the traitors was to wait on Terra, hoping that the two legions he had sent to Ultramar managed to escape the Rune Storm. The worlds on the path of the traitor legions would burn, though the scattered Night Lords and Alpha legions would fight alongside their defenders to the death. War Master. That is what it means, brother. The strength to do what must be done. Attributed to Horus Lupercal during the Roboutian Heresy. Several years passed before the traitor legions arrived to Terra. All that time, Horus sat within the Imperial Palace, directing the efforts of his legion to keep the solar segmentum from falling apart, and listening to what few reports made it through the warp, speaking of atrocities unleashed by the renegades upon the worlds that resisted them, as well as many who didn't. From these fragments of abomination and the knowledge of chaos he had gained during his brief possession, Horus identified which of the traitor legions had succumbed to which power of the warp. This knowledge would prove useful during the siege. The Sons of Horus were far from inactive during that period. They were all over the segmentum, helping the Iron Warriors build defenses of the Sol system and hunting down infiltrators and outright rebels. They stopped the rebellion in the hives of Mercia, whose ruler had long chafed under the yoke of the imperial rule and saw Guilliman's uprising as their chance to reclaim their independence. Unknown to them, the emissaries sent by the arch-traitor to foster their resentment were actually demon hosts, and when the Sons of Horus stormed the would-be rebel stronghold, they revealed themselves in all their terrible glory. In the ensuing bloodbaths, several bloodlines that had ruled the continent for millennia were wiped out, and the population of Mercia returned to the fold of the Imperium. Many other skirmishes were fought before the traitor armada arrived. Flotilla were sent ahead of the main fleet, stolen vessels packed full of crazed cultists, demon ships created by the Dark Mechanicum, and other forces of the lost and the damned. None of these assaults reached Terra itself, but it was a rare week that the defensive cordon at the edge of the Sol system didn't have to destroy one of them and drag its wreckage out of the way for the ships of food and supplies that constantly made their way to the throne world. When the ragged fleet of the Death Guard finally arrived, dragged from the perdition by Mortarian's indomitable will, the defenders of Terra almost opened fire on them out of habit. Then, after years of fighting such long and glorious war, the armies of the traitor legions and their allies finally arrived in the Sol system. The Sons of Horus, warned by the seers of the Thousand Suns and the agents of the Alpha Legion alike, had all returned to Terra, ready to die on the walls of the Imperial Palace, in order to defeat the arch-traitor and restore the rightful rule of the Emperor over the galaxy. The Siege of Terra, victory through sacrifice. Though they took a heavy toll on the rebel forces by making Guilliman sacrifice an entire fleet to thin the veil and bring forth a demonic armada, the outer defenses Perturabo had built in the Sol system were unable to stop the traitor legions. Both Horus and the Lord of Iron had known this to be inevitable, and they were prepared to fight both in the orbit of Terra and on the throne world itself. The fleet of the 4th and the 16th legions, alongside the remnants of the 14th and the 15th, and hundreds of loyal Imperial Navy vessels, fought against the traitor fleet in the skies of Terra. For all their valor, however, they couldn't prevail against overwhelming numbers, and were eventually forced to withdraw, allowing the traitors to land. For the rest of the siege, under the guidance of some of the greatest admirals the Imperium has ever known, such as Tybalt Mar, the Either, captain of the Sons of Horus 18th Company, the Loyalist fleet launched daring raids on the traitor fleet. In these assaults, the Loyalists focused on inflicting as much damage as they could before retreating in the immensity of the void between the worlds of Sol. And thus the siege began in earnest, with the Death Guard decimated at Ishvan V, the Iron Warriors having taken heavy losses in the Martian and Olympian wars, and the Thousand Sons never having had a huge number of warriors. The Sons of Horus formed the bulk of the Space Marines who fought for the Emperor at the beginning of the siege. Accounts of the heresy who have survived the passage of time estimate that the traitor legions had a numerical advantage of at least 5 to 1 in legionnaires. However, even the additions Perturabo had made to the Imperial Palace, and the combined genius of two Primarchs leading the defenders, while Mortarion fought on the front, it was doubtful that they would be able to hold for long. Still, every man, woman, and Astartes on the wall was ready to die before taking a single step back. Then, moments after the traitors had landed, the odds suddenly changed dramatically. Guilliman, for all his planning and scheming, had failed to take into account the true nature of his allies, and they broke from his carefully designed battle plan almost instantly. The Imperial Fist, who had claimed the honor of landing first, charged ahead, their hatred for Perturabo's sons driving them to crush the walls of the palace themselves. Though Guilliman was able to retake control of the 7th after their first assault was pushed back, the losses taken by the Sons of Dorn had already thrown his plans into disarray. Then there were the White Scars and Space Wolves, those who had come to Terra, who completely ignored his instruction, mounting raids on their own and barely fighting alongside the traitor legions. But worst of all were the Blood Angels, an entire legion that, in place of fighting to claim the Imperial Palace and seize victory for their rebellion, turned against the defenseless population of Terra. Without the support of the Sons of Sanguinius, Guilliman found that he couldn't breach the walls of the Imperial Palace, and though his forces and the Loyalists both took tremendous casualties with each passing day, his control over the traitor legions frayed more as well. For several days, the defenders of the palace believed that soon their foes would turn on each other. The knowledge Horus had gained of chaos told him that such an event was inevitable, but before the nature of the traitors became their undoing, Lupercal was his own. From the command center in the Imperial Palace, Horus saw the horrors perpetrated by the 9th Legion, and his rage knew no bounds. After weeks of holding it back while directing the armies of the Imperium in defense of the palace, his wrath finally became too much to hold. He left the command of the defenders to Perturabo and went to the Eternity Gate, where he slaughtered the attacking traitor marines by the dozens. All the while, he shouted for his brother to show himself, to come and confront him, that he might face justice for his crimes. High in orbit, trapped in the veil of madness that had descended upon him at Ishvan, Sanguinius heard the call of his brother and returned to his senses. Driven by grief and guilt, he descended to face Horus, his mind torn between his desire to protect his sons and his horror at what they had become. The two Primarchs fought, and Horus claimed the upper hand. Sanguinius was brought low and laid at Horus's mercy, but just as the War Master was about to deliver the killing blow, he hesitated. Lupercal looked into his brother's eyes and saw not the monster he had become, but the angel he had once been. That second of hesitation was fatal, for Sanguinius' soul broke in that moment. Slaanesh consumed him wholly. The fallen angel rose and drained Horus of his lifeblood, transforming to a demon Primarch in the process. Brother, what have they done to you? Last words of Horus Lupercal, first master of the Imperium. Allegedly. The death of Horus was a terrible blow to the Imperial defenders, but even more so to his legion. Perturabo had to exert all of his will to keep the Sons of Horus from charging recklessly into the enemy ranks, So strong was their urge for revenge. It is said that Ezekiel Abaddon and Tariq Torgadon had to be physically restrained by the rest of the Mournival, which is just Gabriel, Loken, and Horus Aximand. Despair threatened to overcome the defenders, for with the fall of Horus had come the sudden return of the Blood Angels from their butchery and into the fray. Then a Vox transmission echoed across all of Terra, coming from the Legion flagship Andronicus. The Emperor's children, lost during the heresy and thought to have been destroyed, had arrived. Immediately after came another transmission, this one from Sevatar, Legion Master of the Night Lords. Horus was dead. The thought was impossible. It couldn't be true. But it was. They had all seen it. They had all seen their father falling to the one he had called brother, the one he had loved most. From up the walls of the Imperial Palace, they, like all other warriors, loyalists and traitors alike, had frozen and watched the moment the War Master had died. Ezekiel and Tariq were in rage. Their screams were shaking the very stones of the Imperial Palace. But even as he held them back with the help of Aximand and other warriors, Gabriel could hear the other emotion in his brothers' voices. Like him, they were being torn apart inside. "You can't go there, Ezekiel," he shouted, trying to make his brother see reason. "He will kill you." "I don't care. He killed our father. He must die. He must. He must." The words stopped even as the first captain ceased to struggle. Terminator armor wasn't designed to allow much freedom of movement, but Gabriel was fairly certain that had his brother worn a traditional suit of POW armor, he would have been on his knees. Ezekiel Abaddon, who fought the enemies of the Emperor on 1,000 worlds, had gone through the entire civil war with the same expression of contained fury on his face, was weeping like a child. And Gabriel knew that the tears were running down his face. He didn't care. Horus was dead. There was no hope. And then they heard it, a change in the Vox transmission, a difference in tone. At first, so minute anyone with less experience than them would have noticed. Something had happened that was changing the course of the battle. A new transmission started to register in the Vox system. And for a moment, Gabriel couldn't believe the identifier on it. It was a code he had seen during the Great Crusade's early days, before Nicaea, before Ulanor, when the Luna Wolves had fought alongside another legion. Fulgrim? He breathed, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. No one had heard of the Third Legion since the beginning of the war. 100 rumors circulated about the fate of the Emperor's children. Some thought they had been destroyed by the traitors. Others that they had joined them and were being held as reserve forces. For a second, Gabriel was at once relieved to hear that the Phoenician lived, and horrified that maybe this indicated the arrival of other traitor reinforcements. Then, the words reached the grieving Mournival, their pronunciation rough, as if the one speaking them was doing so through grievous injury. An endless agony reborn. By the blades of true brothers returned. Enemies of the Emperor, we have come for you. In orbit, on the ground, the two legions unleashed all of their might against the traitors. The members of the Mournival, now in command of the 16th Legion, seized the opportunity as they ran through the Imperial Palace. They communicated with the leaders of the two newly arrived legions, forming a plan that was as bold as it was desperate. While the Night Lords prevented the arrival of enemy reinforcements, the Mournival, together with the 4 companies, would attack the Eternity Gate. The 4 warriors at the head of this assault, each a legend of the Great Crusade in their own right, were determined to slay the vile traitor Sanguinius and reclaim their father's body. They were dying. Worse, they were losing. What had begun as a glorious countercharge against the tide of darkness had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. In his mind, Ezekiel knew that this was to be expected. No matter what he had become, Sanguinius still possessed the might of a Primarch, and no mere legionnaire could challenge such power. But his heart felt very differently. His heart burned with the thirst for righteous revenge, sorrow at their father's demise, and the primal, animal need to help his comrades. Little Horus Aximand was on the ground, his guts torn open, half his face torn away by the blades of the traitor Primarch. Tarek had lost his left arm, but he still fought back. Back with Gavriel, brave stalwart Gavriel, whatever. And even as they both bled with dozens of wounds. And what was he doing? He, the first captain. He whose battle rage and martial skills were legendary across the Imperium. He was dragging himself on the ground like a worm, inch by inch, towards the corpse of his father. He didn't know where the idea had come from, and yet he knew that there was only one way for them to kill the monster Sanguinius had become. With hands that trembled both because of the pain wrecking his body and the burning in his soul, Abaddon detached the great talon from his father's hand and slid upon his own. It shouldn't have worked. For all the simplicity of its use, the brutal elegance of its design, the talon was still a weapon of war that had been forged by the fabricator general of Mars himself as a gift to Horus. It should have taken half a dozen tech priests several hours of rites and calibration to adapt it to Abaddon's Terminator warplate, to link between the weapon's machine spirit and that of the armor. And yet, the moment the talon of Horus slammed into place around Ezekiel's hand, the lightning claw roared with life, power coursing through each blade. The first captain thought he could feel the weapon's rage, desired to avenge its fallen master, just as great as his own. Abaddon felt a surge of strength through his battered and bruised body, and leapt to his feet before charging with far more speed than he had ever displayed. "A looper call!" he shouted, his cry both of a challenge and mourning, a lamentation of what had already been lost, and a scream of defiance to the dark powers that had created the abomination he faced. 5 claws pierced the chest of the fallen angel and burst out of the creature's back in a shower of blood. Yet the demon remained standing, staring at Abaddon with eyes filled with madness, a demented grin on his once beautiful features. Then the head exploded as Aximand, still spilling his guts on sacred ground and with half his face a bloody ruin, rammed Worldbreaker into it. A horrible, inhuman shriek rented across the entire surface of Terra as the fell spirit Sanguinius had become lost his grasp on the material plane and was hurled back into the infernal aether. But this victory was short-lived. Warriors clad in the blue of the accursed 13th joined the battle, even as most of the Blood Angels fell to the ground in agony. The members of the Mournival, wounded and exhausted, stood their ground, but to their horror, they found themselves separated from Horus's corpse. That horror only grew when they saw some of the Blood Angels approach that body and start dragging him away. "Give him back!" roared Gabriel, tearing through the ranks of the Ultramarines as he tried to advance, to kill the wretches who dared to touch his father's body. All thoughts of restraint, of tactics had deserted him, replaced by the all-consuming need to protect his Primarch's corpse, not to fail him in death as he had failed him in life. "Give him back!" Against all odds, the 4 warriors destroyed Sanguinius' corporal form, banishing his spirit back to the warp. But even as they claimed this mighty victory, the traitor reinforcements arrived in the form of several companies of Ultramarines, sent by their fallen master to capitalize on Sanguinius' presence on the front line. The traitor Marines kept the Mournival away from Horus's body, and it was all the Sons of Horus could do to watch. In terror and horror as the Blood Angels withdrew from the field, carrying with them the corpse of the first Primarch. Many among the Sons of Horus wanted to charge down the walls of the Imperial Palace in order to reclaim their Genesire's remains. But even if they had been ready to break their sacred oaths, they would have been hard-pressed. Guilliman had reacted to the arrival of the 3rd and 8th Legion as well, and had launched one last attack on the palace, led by himself and his brothers in damnation. The walls of the Imperial Palace were breached, and Guilliman, Lionel Johnson, and Rogol Dorn entered the Cavea Ferrum, while the sons of Horus and their allies desperately fought against Ferus Humanus and his twisted marines holding the gate. Many heroes of the loyal legions fell that day, until word came from the depths of the Imperial Palace. Robert Guilliman, the arch-traitor, was dead. The traitor legions broke and fled, their backs exposed to the sons of Horus, who did not hesitate a second to open fire. Soon, the ships of the traitors had either fled or been destroyed. The heresy was over, and the Imperium had triumphed, at the cost of its founder and his bravest and most noble sons and daughters. Post-heresy, a stained honor. I was there the day the Great Crusade ended. I was there the day Horus died for the Emperor. I was there the day the Emperor died for mankind. I was there the day the Black Legion was born, and I will be there the day it dies. Unknown warrior of the 16th Legion, generally attributed to Gavrion Loken. Though the Emperor had defeated Guilliman with the help of Fulgrim, the Master of Mankind had been terribly wounded in the battle, and had to be sat upon the Golden Throne to preserve even the smallest flicker of his life. So it was that the sons of Horus, having already lost their Gene-sire and commander to the ravenous claws of Chaos, also lost their liege lord to eternal silence. Amidst the confusion that followed the flight of the traitor legions and the arrival of the 12th and 17th Legions, it fell to the members of the Mournival to hold the Imperium together. With the Emperor silent and Malcador the Sigillite dead, the possibility of the Imperium collapsing was entirely too likely. It was the combined efforts of the four warlords to keep this downfall at bay, for together they held the same strength and skill as their lost father. With the aid of the remaining Primarchs, these Mournival lords, as the grateful population of Terra soon named them, brought the Imperium back from the brink. From the survivors of the heresy, they named new lords of Terra to replace those who had fallen. In an act that helped seal the authority of this new council, they bowed to the decision that no Primarch or Astartes would hold authority over the Imperial army, to prevent such an event as the heresy from happening again. The title of War Master, bestowed by the Emperor upon Horus, was now stripped of much of its power, becoming a rank the High Lords would grant to the greatest generals only in time of dire need, and for a limited period. So did the Imperium begin to rebuild itself after the horrors of the Civil War, but the darkness unleashed by Guilliman was far from banished. Though they had fled from Terra, the traitor legion still haunted the galaxy. Once the Lords of Terra were firmly in control of the throne world and the nearby systems, the sons of Horus prepared to join in the effort to scour the traitors from the stars. Together with the entire force of their legion, the four Mournival lords waged terrible war upon the enemies of the throne. On 1,000 worlds, the sons of Lupercal fought against traitors from all legions and their allies, both human and demonic. The rage and sorrow they felt for the death of their father, for the loss of the Emperor, for the doom of the Imperial truth was finally unleashed. The wolves of Chthonia mourned their liege in a manner befitting their kin, by making pyres of their enemies' broken corpses. Yet for all their fury, the sons of Horus weren't invincible. The scouring inflicted grave losses on the legion, and by the time the last of the traitor warbands was either destroyed or cast behind the walls of the iron cages, less than 10,000 legionnaires remained who wore the Eye of Horus. 2 members of the Mournival had fallen, their deaths remembered and honored in every sanctuary of the 16th Legion. Tarik Torgeden, captain of the 2nd Company, fell in battle against the demon prince Samus. The creature had already been defeated several times during the heresy, but had always found a way to return to the materia. Tarik, however, managed to inflict such damage upon the Lord of the Immaterium that it still has to reappear today after 10,000 years of banishment. Samus is here, growled the beast, bending its head so that it could look down upon the battered, lone warrior who faced it. Tarik laughed, and the creature roared its fury at his mockery. Or perhaps it was fear. In his hands, the son of Horus held Worldbreaker, the weapon that had killed the Primarch. He had been the one to receive it after Lupercal had fallen. Aximand, though, thought he had used it against Sanguinius, had refused it. Did the beast recognize the weapon? Tarik wondered. Did it fear it? More so than the warrior that wielded it. If so, then it was a fool. Samus is here, it bellowed, raising its weapon, a hideous thing of black metal and twisted angles. Not for long he isn't, Tarik promised and charged the Demon Prince, his Primarch's power maul held high. The second of the Mournival lords to fall during the scouring was Horus Aximand, captain of the 5th Company, lost in life in a duel against Sigismund of the Imperial Fists. Aximand's forces, made of sons of Horus, but also Imperial Navy and Mechanicum ships, had found the 7th Legion as it fled towards the Eye of Terror. But just as they were ready to wipe the foul Sons of Dorn and their Primarch from the galaxy, Sigismund launched a daring attack on Aximand's command ship, disturbing the formation of the Imperial forces and giving his legion an opening to escape. Aximand fell by the blade of the Champion of Khorne, but in what was either an insult or a sign of respect, the destroyer left the body intact instead of taking its skull. You fought well, said Sigismund as he pulled his blade from Aximand's chest. The demon weapon forged in the fires of the Blood Crusade pulsed with hunger as it sought to devour the souls of its victim, only to find it too strong. His 2 hearts had been pierced, blood was gushing from the wound, yet somehow the Mournival Lord remained standing. His face, regrown and reattached after his first fight with Sanguinius, stared at the Imperial fist before him like that of an ancient king rendering judgment upon a criminal. And Sigismund felt the vestige of something akin to fear. Or was it shame? Inside him, without a word, his sword, the blade Mornital, came down upon Sigismund's own hastily raised blade, and the 2 weapons shattered under the strength of the impact, sending both Aximand and Sigismund flying across the ravished bridge. Aximand's corpse hit the wall and slid to the floor, while Sigismund was engulfed in a twirling maelstrom of warp energy, and one last scream was taken from the material plane by the rage of the unleashed demon. With the scouring complete, the sons of Horus returned to their various strongholds to heal their wounds, repair their ships, mourn their brothers, and replace their casualties. There was peace in the Imperium, though the Imperial truth had been forever broken, and fate and superstition were rising in its place. Several decades passed, which the sons of Horus spent rebuilding what they had lost. Then, 100 years after the Battle of Terra, an astropathic message from the Iron Cage around the Eye of Terror reached the Legion's headquarters in the orbit of Catonia. Cadia had fallen to the 9th Legion, the message said. That alone was bad news enough, for the fortress world had been one of the best defended of the Iron Cage, and the linchpin of the Iron Warriors' efforts to keep the traitor legions contained. Yet even worse was the rest of the message, which spoke of the Malformed clones fighting alongside the Blood Angels, whose traits uncannily resembled those of the dead War Master, and whose gene seed their dissected bodies had revealed they shared. Another traitor had been cited as well, Fabius Bile, once the apothecary of the 3rd Legion, who had disappeared during the Bleeding Wars and had been presumed dead. The abomination fought under his banner, and he also appeared to be in relative control of the Blood Angels. The First Black Crusade had begun, and the Imperium's armies must be raised to fight and cast the traitors back into their infernal prison. The piece of information that set the Sons of Horus on a warpath, however, was the fact that several witnesses claimed to have seen the body of Horus Lupercal being brought to Cadia, and into one of the laboratories built at Fabius's command. After relaying the message to the Emperor's children and demanding that Fulgrim explain the actions of his son, the full attack of the 16th Legion departed for the full might of the 16th Legion departed for the border of the war zone, where it joined with the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's children. With the first devastating counterattack led by the Mournival Lords themselves, the Clone Wars began. The traitor forces under Baal's command had claimed dozens of systems during the initial push, only to settle down as their master began to use the captured population and legionnaires for his unholy experiments. Reclaiming these worlds and purging them of heresy would be a task that would last for many years. From the moment the Sons of Horus fought against the creation of Baal for the first time, their sole focus became the destruction of their primogenitor and his foul get. Misshapen Astartes, hideous abominations of flesh, the hordes of clone mutants had been unleashed by Fabius Bile, under the leadership of the greatest horrors of all. The clones of Horus who were complete success, but were then twisted by the dark powers of chaos. These warlords commanded the armies created by the primogenitor and called themselves the Black Legion, a malevolent reflection of the 20 Space Marine legions created by the Emperor at the dawn of the Great Crusade. And demon ships forged in the Eye of Terror by a dark mechanicum, they rampaged across the territory conquered by the Black Crusade, and the Sons of Horus vowed to bring every such abomination down, no matter the cost. The Black Legion. Of all the war bands and gatherings of traitors and heretics, the Black Legion is the most foul, perhaps the most powerful too. Born from the spawn of Fabius's failed experiments, his strength has waxed and waned over the ages, yet never has it been completely eradicated. The Imperial strategists fear that such a feat is impossible. Their banner of the eightfold star of chaos undivided has been raised on the battlefields across the breadth and width of the entire galaxy, against all manners of enemies, though most often against the forces of the Imperium. None of the 4 Chaos Gods are especially favored by its members, though individuals within its ranks do walk the path to glory, with several having reached ignominious end and been reborn as demon princes. Any warband can claim affiliation to the Black Legion, and over the years legionaries from all 9 traitor legions have cast aside their former allegiances and have donned the black. Even renegade groups made up entirely of humans and mutants can decide to bear its foul emblem as their own. Though more powerful warbands might be insulted by such presumption. Other traitor legions regard these groups as a fool and inferiors, and have often attacked them for slaves, supplies, or sport. Yet even these ancient warlords know deep within their tormented souls that while their own legions grow weaker with the passing of time and the death of their warriors, the Black Legion only gets more powerful with each century. While Fabius Bile is revered as the primogenitor of the Black Legion, he has little interest in actually leading it to war. Like the traitor legions, the Black Legion is divided in hundreds of war bands with individual leaders, and it is far from uncommon that these war bands fight one another. But the name of the Black Legion has spread far and wide, and whenever Astartes from the Loyal Legion succumb to the Lords of Chaos and break their oath to the Imperium, it is often to the Black Legion they turn. This, combined with the products of Bile's ongoing experiments, always joining the Horde, has kept the Black Legion's numbers high since the end of the Clone Wars. Should any warlord manage to rise to truly unite it, or Bile take a greater interest in his errant children, the Black Legion would be a terrible threat not just to the Imperium, but to all life in the galaxy. For several years, the Sons of Horus fought to purge the Imperium from the taint of the Black Legion and the Blood Angels. With the help of the Iron Warriors and the Emperor's children, they managed to push back the forces of chaos, until eventually the warriors of the Ninth Legion were recalled in the Eye of Terror. The War of Woe had begun, and Azakelon needed every warrior to oppose the Imperial fists. This allowed the Imperial forces to launch one final attack directly onto the invaders' primary fortress. There were the cloning facilities from which the monsters of the Black Legion were spawned. There lay the desecrated corpse of Horus Lupercal. There was the primogenitor. While the Iron Warriors fought in orbit against the chaotic fleet, the Emperor's children, the Sons of Horus, descended upon the planet to purge it of evil. After such discussion, it had been decided that the 16th Legion would destroy the cloning facility and reclaim their father's body, while Fulgrim himself would hunt down his wayward son and bring him to justice. The Battle of the Clone Pits was grueling and nightmarish, with the Sons of Horus facing countless abominations. Ezekiel Abaddon, Mournival Lord, and hero of the Great Crusade, was separated from his forces and brought low by no less than 3 of the horrendous crones of his Primarch. Though he killed them all in return, in the end it was Gabriel Loken who reclaimed Horus's body and later ordered it burned so that it could never again be used against the Imperium in such a manner. The cloning labs burned with their progeny, but Bile escaped judgment, unleashing a horde of malformed clones of Fulgrim upon his Primarch to slow him down, while he cowardly escaped. The Clone Wars were won, but many of the creations of the primogenitor escaped, and they would haunt the Imperium for millennia to come. Lupercal! Abaddon howled as he plunged the talon into the chest of another clone. The 4 blades burst out of his back in a shower of blood, and the abomination fell. But there were still 2 more, and Ezekiel was bleeding from a dozen grievous wounds. The assault on the cloning facilities had not been easy. He had gotten separated from the rest of the Justarian. My own damn fault, he thought, as he turned to face the remaining clones. If he hadn't charged ahead. He shook his head. Regrets meant nothing now. Whatever happened to him, Gabriel would take care of things. He would make sure this place was burned to the ground. Some part of Abaddon wondered if perhaps he had deliberately pushed forward, ahead of his men. Perhaps he couldn't bear it any longer. They had lost so much. The faces of lost brothers haunted Abaddon's nights, driving him to ever greater feats of endurance and martial skill to avenge their spirit. I will see you soon, brothers. Father, he whispered before forcing his burning muscle into motion once more, determined to meet the last abomination head-on. Lupercal, he roared as their blades pierced his hearts, and the talons cut through their armor and into their corrupted flesh. At some point, either during the end of the Clone Wars, or soon after, Gabriel Loken, the last of the Mournival Lords, to have held this position since the heresy vanished. Not even in the Ordo's most secretive archives can any clues as to his ultimate fate be found, save for a single code that is believed to come from him, and that predicts his presence on the day the Black Legion is finally destroyed. The Sons of Horus believe him dead, and honor him in the same way as the other 3 first Mournival Lords. The end of the Clone Wars marked the definitive transition for the 16th Legion, from the heresy into the Age of Imperium. The Sons of Horus scattered across the Imperium and started to wage the countless wars that would be required for mankind to survive. Always they are at the forefront of any expansion effort, thriving on the same spirit of conquest that inhabited them during the Great Crusade. But even then, the echoes of their past have never truly left them. Hundreds of champions of the 16th Legion have left their brothers over the millennia to go on hunting quests, vowing to bring the arch-renegade Bile to justice. Though several of them have claimed to have slain the betrayer each time, they have been proven wrong, as the primogenitor reappeared, leading another raid in real space, or having dealings with rebellions and cults across the entire galaxy. The reason for that apparent immortality is unknown, though there are several theories in both the 16th Legion and the Inquisition, ranging from dark pacts with powerful demons to the most blasphemous of genetic perversions. During the 38th millennium, the animosity between Fabius Bile and the Sons of Horus escalated to yet another level as the foul primogenitor unleashed one of his most cruel and twisted plans. The exact details, as well as the name of those who were involved, are kept secret by the 16th, who only reveal what the Inquisition does know grudgingly, unwilling to add another inglorious passage to their history. Bile, after millennia of being opposed by the Sons of Horus, had designed a scheme that he believed could destroy the 16th Legion forever. In his gene laboratories on the Eye of Terror, he created a young man that, to any human and even psychic eye, appeared to be completely normal. This creature was then taken by his agents to one of the Sons of Horus recruiting worlds and introduced into the local population. The clone himself knew nothing of its origins, his mind shrouded by implanted false memories that convinced him that he had always lived on the planet. When the Sons of Horus came to bring the new recruits to their apothecaries, the young man was immediately singled out, for he had demonstrated incredible strength, endurance, but also courage, honor, and leadership. He was taken into the ranks of the aspirants, and even the most careful screenings of the Legion apothecaries failed to discover his true nature. He did incredibly well in training, and soon received the implants that made him first a scout, then a true legionary. Bile had designed his creation with all the evil genius he had become famous for, and the introduction of the 16th Legion's gene seed reacted with the secrets he had implanted within his spawn's gene code. The clone grew in strength and stature like all his comrades, but his own growth didn't stop at the level of a normal space marine, and continued until he was the same size as the legendary Primarchs of old. Those around him believed him to be blessed by the Emperor, his transformation a result of the particular affinity with Horus's gene seed. This strength, combined with the undeniable martial qualities, led to the unknowing plant becoming captain of an entire company. Many enemies of the Emperor were brought low by his hand, but then Bile's plan entered its second phase. Visions of the Great Crusade and of the Heresy started to haunt the clone. Slowly, without realizing what was happening to him, he came to believe that he was Horus Lupercal himself, reborn in flesh after 10,000 years. Many Sons of Horus also believed in this reincarnation. Such was the likeness of the clone both in appearance, but also in martial skill and behavior. He matched the first War Master described in the archives perfectly, and the Sons had ever longed to be reunited with their lost father. Pushed along the manipulations of secret agents of Bile, the self-proclaimed Primarch tried to seize control of the entire Legion, as he genuinely believed was his right and duty. He called the Mournivar Lords to him, that they may bend the knee and rejoin at the reunion. The four lords answered his call, but not to kneel. They had inherited the accumulated knowledge of their predecessors, including the secrets that had been kept from the rest of the Legion. They knew the true extent of Fabius Bile's hideous work during the Clone Wars. With ranks of legionnaires facing each other in tense silence, the Mournival Lords confronted the clone. They decried him as a fraud and a heretic, naming him the false king. They vowed to see him destroyed, and the Legion freed from all the lies he had, willingly or not, brought with him. This event is recorded in the Order's archives as a denunciation of the false king. While it was right that the clone be exposed as the abomination he was, there would be dire consequences for the Mournival's decree. Horus was the greatest of the Primarchs. He was our father, in blood and in spirit. Under his command, I would venture into the Eye of Terror itself and spit in the face of the dark gods. But you are not him. You are a lie, clad in flesh born of our great enemy's mad genius. Horus is dead and can never return. From a member of the Mournival during the denunciation of the false king. What followed was a bloody and terrible civil war within the ranks of the 16th Legion. The false king, during his rise, had accumulated millions of mortal soldiers to his cause. They had flocked to him, blinded by his greatness. Now they died under the might of the sons of Horus in a campaign that lasted for 3 months and reduced several once mighty worlds to ruin. Thousands of legionnaires on both sides died, though several companies whose leaders had been deceived by the false king returned to the fold after some among their ranks rose against the treachery of their masters. As the conflicts dragged on, signs began to appear that confirmed the words of the Mournival. Warbands of the Black Legion started to take part in the battles, fighting against the sons of Horus unaligned with the false king, and retreating rather than fighting the others. Some of the warriors fighting under the banner of the one they believed to be Horus reborn started to suffer from mutations. The librarians driven to insanity and corruption by the laughter of demons. The War of the False King, as it came to be known, ended with the death of the clone Primarch. By that point, the warriors that were still loyal to him were little different from Chaos Marines themselves, drenched in corruption and self-delusion. When the force of the Imperium finally cornered him in his final fortress, whose genetic makeup had begun to decay, he was afflicted with mutation and madness, at long last realizing the truth of his nature. It is said that he welcomed the blade that ended his life, and freed him from the existence of lies. Every trace of his deeds before his rebellion were erased from the Legion's archives, and his very name was destroyed, to the point not even the Mournival Lords know him by anything but the title they gave him during the denunciation. Brother, I am sorry. Last words of the false king. Unverified, keep in mind. The Inquisition thoroughly investigated the warriors who had initially followed the false king, but turned their back on him later. They willingly submitted themselves to these examinations, wanting to purge the shame of their deed in any way necessary. A few of the false king's men, however, survived and escaped, most of them joining the ranks of the Black Legion. It is said that they hope the Primogenitor will give them another Primarch to lead them, and are willing to perform any deed, no matter how vile, to earn this gift. 1,000 years after the terrible affair, yet another blow was dealt to the 16th Legion, though it came with what the Imperium at large considered a boon. In the year 392 of the 41st millennium, Lord Commander Solar Macarius was named War Master by the Senatorum Imperialis, and declared a crusade to expand the domains of the God Emperor to the confines of the galaxy. He led a massive army to the imperial frontier on the Segmentum Pacificus, the likes of which had not been seen since the days of the Great Crusade. The Sons of Horus had always supported those deemed worthy of the title of War Master, especially when they attempted to push the boundaries of the Imperium further. A full third of the 16th Legion joined the Macarian Crusade, with 2 members of the Mournival leading them, and counting among Macarius' favored advisors. As per the tradition of the 16th, one of the Mournival Lords sent was calm and collected, while the other carried with him the passion of the Legion, that the two might balance each other. However, the Mournival Lord, tasked with keeping both his brother and Macarius' own drive for conquest, fell in battle early in the crusade. In the Karskar system, the forces of the Imperium met their first true challenge, in the form of the cult of the Angel of Fire, the base humans who worshipped the Lord of Change, the titular angel. The greater demon killed the Mournival Lord, only to be defeated and banished moments later by Macarius himself, whose soul was able to resist the false promise of the demon and hold to faith in the God Emperor. Despite the ultimate victory, the death of the Mournival Lord would have lasting consequences for the Crusade. The ambitions of the War Master and the remaining Space Marine commander fueled each other, and the Crusade advanced at a prodigious pace, claiming 1,000 worlds in only 7 years. The sons of Horus spearheaded the assaults, while Macarius' tactical genius allowed him to turn these initial gains into strongholds. As the year 399 of the 31st millennium neared to a close, the forces of the Imperium were approaching the galactic border beyond which there lay only the cold blackness of the abyss, far from the light of the Astronomicon. At this point, even the remaining Mournival Lord counseled Macarius to end the crusade, content in the knowledge that they had brought 1,000 worlds into the Imperium. But Macarius wanted more. He wanted to push on into the Hollow Zone, to let nothing escape his conquering grasp. However, when faced with the opposition of the sons of Horus, but also of his own generals and other advisors, he relented. His forces were delighted to know that the crusade was over, and prepared to return to Terra in glory. On the way to the throne world, however, tragedy struck and Macarius died. The exact circumstances of his demise are unknown. Official records indicate that the War Master had contracted a potent fever on one of the worlds he had conquered, and the disease had finally taken him. Yet there are many other versions in the Order's archives. Some claim that Macarius, broken by the refusal of his men to continue the crusade, simply faded away in his sleep, or even took his own life. Other accounts tell a darker reason for his death, which, if confirmed, would shed the disturbing light of the events that followed it. The human who dared claim the title of War Master looked upon Zahariel with hate-filled eyes, but no sound passing his lips. The agents of the Lord of Lies had worked well, poisoning Macarius over the course of the entire crusade, also that when the end came, his soul would belong to Zahariel. It had truly been a masterstroke, the Dark Angel reflected, one that would soon result in the destruction of untold across the Imperium. The brutish sons of Horus hadn't even realized they were being manipulated by the scions of the Great Changer. With Macarius' soul in his grasp, Zahariel would be able to do as he pleased with the body, and the triumphant War Master would rise against the Lords of Terra, causing a civil war the likes of which had not been seen since the days of the heresy. His generals, carefully groomed over the course of several generations, would follow him. Their ambition would allow no other outcome. He reached out his mind, preparing to tear the essence of the great general from his body. But to his initial surprise and growing horror, he found that he couldn't touch it. Something was protecting Macarius' soul from his grasp, and the life of the War Master was fleeing. In mere seconds he would be dead, and it would all have been for nothing. For the Emperor, said a voice behind Zahariel, and the Grand Master had just enough time to turn around before a bolt shell crashed through his chest plate and into his primary heart, before his enchantment took him away and back to the First Legion's homeworld, where he would have to explain his failures to his Primarch. Zahariel caught a glimpse of the transhuman silhouette in green, scaled armor. The sons of Horus honored the death of their ally, and prepared to leave the territory claimed by the Crusade, leaving it in the hands of Macarius' human generals, so that it might be added to the Imperium proper. However, no sooner had the War Master breathed his last that 7 generals who had led his army groups turned against each other and the Imperium. This is the story of Alexander the Great, by the way. They divided the territory conquered by the Crusade into petty empires and crowned themselves lords. So began the Roboutian Heresy, named after one of the 2 warlords who failed to notice the growing ambitions and blackening souls of those under their command. Obviously, the sons of Horus were outraged by such base treachery. For 30 years, they scoured the Segmentum Pacificus, hunting down each of the treacherous generals and killing him within his most secure strongholds, showing to those who had foolishly followed his command into rebellion the price of betrayal. Chaos forces began to appear in the war, allying themselves with the rebels against generals or taking advantage of the destruction to plunder and despoil. A warband calling itself the Minotaurs, believed to be an offshoot of the 13th Legion, was notably responsible for the destruction of 3 entire worlds before the sons of Horus cornered them in the Exian system. Several of the generals also made direct pacts with the ruinous powers, sacrificing their traitorous souls to prolong their unworthy existence. By the time the 16 Legion's forces and the Imperial troops who had remained loyal were done, the swaths of space Macarius had conquered was in ruins. Only a small human population remained, and most of its existing industry had been destroyed. Still, the Imperium had gained 1,000 worlds to be colonized and exploited by teeming masses of mankind. To the High Lords of Terra, there was an acceptable result. Macarius was named a saint of the Imperium by the Ecclesiarchy. His story used to inspire loyalty and devotion across the galaxy. At the end of the Macarian Heresy, the Mournival Lord who had survived to return to the rest of his legion in shame that he had failed to foresee the general's betrayal. A new Mournival Lord was selected, and the Brotherhood renewed its ancient oaths to preserve balance within the ranks, no matter the circumstances. So did the 5th century of the 41st Crusade began for the 16th Legion, with one more shame added to their past, and many more vows to atone for it through battle. Now, as the 41st millennium draws to a close, the forces of the Black Legion are rising once more. Dozens of warbands have been sighted outside the Eye of Terror, and more Chaos Marines from other legions don the black of Fabius's armada with each passing year. All they await is a suitable leader, one willing to guide them out of the Eye and into war against the Imperium. Should such a Chaos Lord arise, he will be able to command the Black Crusade of unprecedented might, but would also find the full strength of the sons of Horus arrayed against him. As the heirs of Lupercal's size, the chances to finally erase the insult on their honor that is the Black Legion. Lucht Huron, the savior of Badab. Born on the high world Badab Primaris in the Segmentum Ultima, Lucht Huron was selected to become a son of Horus after the 12th Company of the 16th Legion took heavy losses fighting against a massive pirate invasion from the nearby Maelstrom. Huron took well to the implant and became a member of the Scouts. Only a few years later, during the conquest of the Eldar Exodite world of Laorgi, Huron distinguished himself when he killed the Xenos warlock with his bare hands, resisting the witch's psychic assault through sheer force of will. Many among the company believed this marked him for greatness, and he was quickly elevated to the rank of full Astartes. Over the next century, Huron rose through the ranks by displaying the combination of martial skill and tactical genius only seen in a few of the Legion's captains. When the 12th captain, Rovik Blake, fell in battle against an orc war boss, he was selected by his peers to succeed him. This ascension was as quick as it was unceremonious, for with the fall of Blake, the orcs had seized the momentum of the ongoing conflict between them and Imperial forces of the Maelstrom Zone. Hawa emerged from the warp and converged on Badab Primaris, Huron's homeworld. Determined to prevent the planet's loss to the great beast, Huron planned a devastating counterattack, aiming to kill the war boss who had killed his predecessor, and break the cohesion of the enemy horde. The resulting duel left Huron gravely injured, with almost half of his body needing to be replaced by cybernetic augmentations. But the plan worked. With the death of their leader, the orcs turned on each other, becoming easy prey for the Imperial forces. The grateful population of the High World bestowed upon Huron the title of Savior of Badab, and he has since led many operations against the enemies of man. There is now talk among the Legion that Huron is in line for the Mournival, should the seat free itself. Each of the 4 lords is always on the lookout for his own potential successor, for the rise to the rank means an acute awareness of the reality of war, and none believe themselves immortal. Many, including within the Inquisition, have great expectations for the savior of Badab should he ascend to such position. Yet others feared what it might portend, speaking of prophecies that allude to a dark destiny for Huron.